Hey, how you doing today? Just wanted to go over Romans chapter 1, explaining what it's about and how someone ends up in a reprobate mind. Now, first off, I'm coming from the worldview that man is born in an innocent state and he's neutral at birth. And if we take a look here at the word nature, because a lot of people believe that we have a sin nature from birth and that we're totally corrupt, totally depraved, and that you don't have an ability to choose God. That's why I got that word up there, inability. But I'm coming from the worldview that's basically not that, which is saying that we're born neutral. So we're not born with this sin in our flesh, like these other people like to say, some malady in our flesh. But if we take a look at the word nature, it describes more of why Paul is saying this in Romans 1. Nature's in Greek is the word physis, and it means a principle of growth. Subject to nature of growth by progression. So you either become a slave to your base fleshly desires, or you become a servant of righteousness. And that's all that Paul's describing in Romans 1. He's just describing this process of this principle of growth, this process of either being deceived and giving up because you've been deceived and you're not understanding things the right way and how actually your own mind works, or you're doing well and you're having the ability. Remember in Genesis 4, God tells Cain that if you do well, sin desires to have you. Remember, he's talking to Cain. And he says, sin desires to have you, but you must rule over it. So, coming from this, my worldview of what the Bible actually teaches and what Paul was actually teaching, that we were born in this neutral state, means that we have a free will. And that's why God is telling Cain in Genesis 4 that you must rule over the sin. You have the ability to choose to do what's right. That doesn't mean that you're totally saved and that you're enlightened or anything like that. It just means that you have the ability to choose what's right, to know between what's right and wrong, and you have the ability to choose that, go through this process of repentance that we're going to describe here in just a second, and receive the blood of Christ to be cleared and be purified. So let's go in real quick here and look at this Romans 1. Let's see here. Starting in verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So that's the first in this process, because Paul's mainly describing how you end up being a reprobate. So everything he's talking about is the process of being deceived and giving up. But basically the first process there is you suppress the truth. You suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them. So he's already saying, even in this innocent state, what may be known of God is already manifest in you. So we have a knowledge of God. There's a certain kind of a knowledge of God, even in this neutral, innocent state, where we know God and we know what the right thing to do is. That's why we have the ability. That's why God is telling Cain that you must rule over it. That's our responsibility. And if you don't do it, if you don't rule over it, if you don't use your free will properly, then that means you're going to be deceived and you're going to end up in this process. And that's what's happening to most of these Christians, so-called Christians, that believe in a sin nature, believe that you don't have an ability to choose God, believe that Jesus is just imputing his righteousness to you through some death, penal substitution is what they call it, and Jesus is just imputing all of his goodness to you. So you basically don't really have to do anything, and you can keep on sinning, and then sometime God's going to forgive you, which is actually literally opposite of what the Bible teaches, saying that you have to go through a process of repentance and then you're cleared. So For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So we're without excuse. Why would Paul say we're without excuse if you were born with a sin nature, where you're basically making excuses and blaming it on God and saying that, well, there's basically nothing I can do because I got this malady in my flesh, and so I can't choose God. God has to come and basically do this special thing of grace for me to be able to access him at all and be able to choose him at all. Why would he say that? How could you have no excuse if that was the case? Because it's not. The reality is that you have a free will and you're born neutral. See, that's what I'm trying to get across here. That's this whole sin nature stuff is a total lie. Paul was never teaching that. None of the early Christians were ever teaching that. Professing to be wise, they became fools. Actually, let's back up here. Your heart is darkened. I think I already read that one. Although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So then your heart becomes darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image, made to be like birds and man. So then you come up with this false image, you worship it. Therefore God gave them up to uncleanness in the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie. So then you exchange the truth of God for the lie. Dishonor their bodies among themselves. For this reason, God gave them up to vile passions. So then at that point, you're being given over to your vile passions. Because you're just kind of going through this process, like we were saying, of its growth, but it's growth to darkness. And then on this side here, the people that are doing well, like Abel, right? He was moving into doing well, and he was using his free will in the right way. He was doing the right thing, so he's listening to the truth. He's obeying. His heart becomes enlightened. He's ruling over it, and then he reaching this higher state of illumination and being purified and dwelling with Christ where his blood does cover us, right? And that's part of the problem, is that they also say that it's faith alone. So anything that you would try to do, see, they say that you using your free will in any way, trying to resist your sin or do anything like that, that's works. So you're trying to save yourself, and why would you need Jesus if you could, do this stuff yourself? Well, it's because the Bible teaches it's not one or the other. See, everything's like so black and white with these false teachers. It's because we're in synergy with God. We're workers together with God, like Paul says in Corinthians. We're workers together with God. There's a synergy going on. It's not all God doing it. God is doing most of it for sure, but it's also we are participating in that by using our free will to choose the right way and becoming more and more purified where we're not a slave to sin any longer. So it's a working together, see? And on the other side there, they say that it's either, they say that it's all God that's going to do it for you, right? That's what they're trusting in. God's going to eventually completely set me free of my sin one day. Why they're saying that they're already saved. So it makes no sense. There's no logic in it. There's no sense because this is not what the scriptures were teaching. That's not what the apostles were teaching. That's not what Jesus was teaching either. So then they end up in the vile passions, and then finally, after that, it says here that then, and even though they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind, to do the things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness. So it's just, you keep going down and down into this reprobate mind, this debased mind where you're no longer good for anything of the things of God at all, and you're just totally using your body for immorality, like Paul talks about in Romans 6. Use your body as an instrument for righteousness, not an instrument for immorality. But that's what ends up happening. If you say you've got the sin nature, you're not understanding the process here. You're not understanding what the scriptures are really teaching. And then you can end up in that process, even though you're saying you're a Christian, you're saying you're saved by God, but you're still sinning. You're still participating in that because you've been deceived. And that's why I'm making this video, is to hopefully show people what the real process is. Let your wisdom open up, and just look at what I'm saying here, and you'll know that what I'm saying is right. What I'm saying is how it really works. I mean, even people that go to like AA or something like that I'm not even saying that that's of God, but people can use their free will, because we have a free will, and they can get free of their cigarettes, they can get free of their booze, right? I know people that have been able to do that. I'm not saying that they're reaching a point of salvation with Jesus or anything, or coming together like that, but they are able to put their things off because they're using their free will in one sense, right? So they're able to do it. But on the other hand, these other Christians that say you have no ability and you have a sin nature, they're not even able to get rid of most of the stuff they're struggling with, even though they say they've got the power of God. They're waiting on Jesus to do it for them one day. So don't be deceived, my friend. If you're believing stuff like that, you got to throw it off. You got to get away. You got to get out. You got to see what the truth is here. 2 Corinthians 7 talks about godly sorrow produces repentance leading to salvation, not to be regretted. Right? And then what does it do? What diligence it produced in you, what clearing of yourselves. So that godly sorrow, repentance, ruling over it, that should lead you, working together with God, that's going to lead you to that clearing, that total clearing. And then just one more thing real quick, because I don't want this video to be too awful long. Back in Romans in chapter 2, right here. This is another thing that you can show that there is no such thing as a sin nature, that Paul didn't believe in that. Down in chapter 2, verse 14, for when the Gentiles who do not have the law, by nature do the things in the law. How could the Gentiles who don't have the law, by nature do the things in the law, if they have a sin nature and they have no ability to choose God? But Paul's saying that they were able to do it by their nature, although not having the law are a law unto themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience bearing witness. So that's what he was saying already in chapter 1, right? He was saying the same thing. What may be known of God is manifest in them, because even the Gentiles are born in a neutral state. They're born innocent. So if they do well, which they can still do well, because there's some level, right, of them maybe in their culture or whatever, or maybe just whatever, they're able to choose to do what's right because they already have that in them. They know that God, even though they might not fully understand God as in the Old Testament as some of the people who had the scriptures and things, right? But they still had this ability to move forward, and ultimately in the end God's going to judge you for what level of understanding that you had and how you use that from the beginning. So that's what it is. We're born in the neutral state, and you have to choose God. You have to use your free will to choose God, work together with Him, become purified and cleansed through the repentance. Don't end up falling into this reprobation and these other lies. Hope this showed you a little bit, gave you something interesting to think about. God bless you.